Hello Larry, how are you?
All right, Alessandro, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man.
All right.
So, I have a question for you today.
Okay.
What do you think Pocket is, and what's a way to improve it?
Well, Pocket is just about, really playing almost predictably and just being really easy to latch on to. It's kind of like, almost like how easy are you to follow. You lay it down and people kind of build on top of it, and it's like, and it's got to be tight. Obviously, it's got to have a great time, great dynamics. But the big thing is simple kind of words, almost that like predictability. I think that's a big part of it. I think, just and it comes from having great time and great dynamics. I think that people try to make a big issue out of things, or try to make it like a magical kind of thing, where, you just get out that metronome, you work on your time and your dynamics and your interdynamics and your sound, and it'll come. A lot, just playing with a lot of tunes obviously is going to help that. But it's that tightness that makes it, it's like somebody who speaks concisely, very easy to follow, So that's Pocket to me. I think is just that feeling, that place where you put something where everybody can relate to it and kind of latch on to it. It's a rhythm. It could be drums, it could be just machinery that you can hear day to day in life that has a rhythm, that is easy to predict and you can latch on to, And I think it comes down to having great time and great dynamics too. There's other things obviously that go into it, but time really is what it's about. And the spacing between the notes, because that's what makes what you play predictable, which isn't a really musical sounding word, or people don't like to think of that word, but makes what you play easy to latch on and predictable, like people know where you're going and they can kind of sink into it with you.
And how can you work on it?
Well, the first thing is it's one of those things nobody really wants to hear. You have to take out that metronome and play to a metronome, and like I'm sure you've heard me say before, people will come up with some pretty creative ways to rationalize why they don't think they need to work with a metronome. But there's really no good reason. It's how you work with the metronome is important. Like I always have people spread the click out, like have it on half notes or whole notes. That becomes a different thing than having it be on every quarter note or every eighth note for sure. So there's ways to go about it that are very important, but you got to get that metronome out, and you have to develop your dynamic and tempo control, the ability to play at different tempos, which I find is kind of lacking a lot of times. Can you play this groove at 80? Can you play it at 100? Can you play it at 112? That's, there's a lot of other things, but just in general, people sometimes I think that technique and feel are like mutually exclusive. They're like two different things, but they're just different parts of a process. You get something down to the point where you can feel it, like it's just natural to you. It's kind of instinctual, and you get to having a good feel from a standpoint of strength. Like the better your time is, the more you can manipulate things.
Exactly.
If you're coming from a point of weakness where your time isn't very good, then you don't have that same strength. But sometimes people will think that the feel issue is something that came separate from a metronome or from good time skills. I think it's just they're just feeling it, and so they'll say, so therefore you don't want to play with a metronome, or it's going to, kind of interrupt your feel. And I think that that's just a misunderstanding of the process, kind of.
What do you think of using a metronome on subdivisions?
I think that's good when you're trying to put something together initially. Almost like, you have like buy one of those pieces of furniture or something from the store, and you have the, you have the directions, and it tells you, put this in here, put that there, and you got to follow it kind of meticulously. That's kind of the way I look at that. It's good to really keep you right where you're supposed to be, but the second you kind of have it mechanically down to a certain degree, I think that they can quickly become not such a good thing, because it kind of becomes like micromanaging, like kind of going, you're on, you're off, you're on, you're off, like it kind of creates stress doing that, I think. You know, if you have it down and you want to start getting the feel or the bigger picture down, having it, all the subdivisions can definitely make you feel stressed and make you very aware of every little imperfection, and that is what we don't want at that point. So, I mean, it's good at a point, and another point not so good.
Second question I want to ask you is about your rudimental background.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think of rudiments in a musical setting?
Well, I think, that that's a great question. I think the fact that those questions even need to be asked sometimes is an example of how somewhere along the line, you know, things started to become separate or unrelated in people's minds, because to me everything is made up of rudiments. They literally are everything. You know, people have said sometimes, I want to incorporate more rudiments into my playing. And I had a student one time who said, well, that's like saying I want to incorporate more letters into my words. You know, it's like, you are playing rudiments no matter what you think or what you call them. It's impossible to play the drum set without playing rudiments. So in that sense, you can't avoid playing them. It doesn't matter what you call them, but as far as how I think of them too, I actually believe probably how a lot of them originally came about were more as musical phrases rather than, you know, a sticking even per se, or like or a rhythm. You know, even though paradiddles fit perfectly in a binary thing, you know, 8th notes or 16th notes, I think originally it was a kind of a melody. You know, so they're very musical, they're singable, and most of them sound like what they are, you know, like flam, you know, and paradiddle, you know. So I think if we look at it that way, then we start to understand what rudiments actually are, and I think that it'll make them more meaningful to us, and therefore it'll give people less of an excuse to avoid having to do them, thinking that there's something else out there that really kind of isn't. You know, it comes back to that all the time.
All the great drummers, they come to the rudiments.
Yeah, and you know, I've even heard people describe some of their favorite drummers and say, well, they don't have a big rudiment. But I mean, I think that all that stuff is a misunderstanding. I agree with you. I think that for the most part, you're not going to find a great drummer who doesn't have a very strong, you know, rudimental background. I don't mean that in a literal sense, like they march in a drum corps or something, but they're just, you know, rudiments. The word isn't not necessarily the musical word, it's just the rudiments of something, the pieces, the building blocks.
It's the language of the instrument.
Yeah, it's all there. You're right. You're not going to find somebody who doesn't have that, who's actually a great drummer, for sure.